ahead, bring the chairs over.
Yeah, if you guys just want to pull those over, that's fine. So, like I said, for the test that we have for tomorrow, there's no essay at all, in part because I want to make sure that I have enough time to correct them and turn it back to you. I'm actually going to be gone tomorrow, and so is Mrs. Regal. Basically, NDSU got a grant for trying to improve how they train teachers. There's some meetings that we're going to at NDSU, so there'll be a sub. So the sub won't be able to like run and correct it for you really either. You guys have to wait till the next days. Okay? So we'll do the corrections first thing on Tuesday in class. And then after that, we'll talk about the final. Okay? So, format-wise, 1 through 39 are multiple choice, like I talked about. And then from 40 to 69 is matching. Some are in groups of 4, some are in groups of 6. It's kind of a combo. And then the last 11 questions are true or false. So I counted, and there's literally 3 questions from chapter 21, the last one that we didn't discuss. And those 3 questions are all like terms, bolded terms. So in that chapter, it talks about different types of psychologists and what they do. For example, like sports psychologists. Let's see, what do you think sports psychologists try to help people with? Or what's their focus? Well, I'm trying to get athletes to perform better, right? So pretty straightforward. Whereas if you have like a clinical psychologist, they try to assess what's going on with individuals. If you have like a business or an industrial organization psychologist, they try to assess business structure to improve that, right? If you have a research psychologist, they do research. So really, the questions that are on there, if you even just read the chapter summary and then read all the bolded definitions on the side, I think you'd be able to get them correct. They're really common sense for those questions. Some of the other questions from the rest of the chapters that we covered in class are a little more specific, obviously. Okay? So the big goal of this unit was to discuss how group dynamics influence people, right? What is the branch in psychology that tries to address that called? Social psychology. Exactly. Okay? So, we talked about a number of different things in this unit. Some of the things we talked about more specifically include relationships, like divorce, likelihood of marriage working out, likelihood of relationships working out. We also talked about friendship and how friendship plays a role in shaping individuals' behavior, like what they're involved in, what rewards you get from friendship. So if you remember in class, the text identified 3 general trends that you see in friendship, like 3 values that you get from friends. One of those was like the value of help they could give you. So if you go to their house and they help you to study, that's one example. What type of friendship value is that? If they can help you, utility value. Yeah, good. They can help you get something done. They serve utility value. What if you just enjoy like their company and they help support you? So ego support, good. And then what is the last one, where if they are like providing you with interesting things to think about, or you're just entertained being around them? What is that? If you hang out with them because you find them interesting or they make you happy. Somebody is entertaining to you if they provide you like mental stimulation. They call that stimulation value, right? So if you can remember those definitions and apply those to like scenarios, that's probably 4 or 5 questions. Okay? Alright, we also talked about something in class where like when you get to school, you look back and reflect on a school year or a sports season you had, or when you met somebody or whatever. It's easier for you to remember the stuff that happened right away, or the stuff that happened towards the end, right? Unless something in the middle is like really unique. They call that if it's piqued your interest. Like in some classes I showed the Old Spice commercials, right? Like you don't forget those because they're so weird, okay? So what is the tendency to remember something that you see right away? What's that called? The primacy effect. Primacy effect. What's the tendency to remember something that happened more close to you in time? That's the recency. Yep. So if something is more recent, it's closer in time, right? So if you look back on it, you probably could remember the first day of school better than you could like a random day during the school year, unless there was like a fight or something unique happened that day, right? You tend to remember those things. I remember moving into the dorm room and then like talking to different people at NDSU then, because it was the start of my college career. I remember that better than I would like a week later, right? Well, it's got that unique thing element, it's new, but it's one of the first things that happened, okay? Whereas I also remember some of the later times I had in college, right? We talked about this a little bit earlier when we discussed thinking and mental processes, but what's the term for a mental shortcut that you use to try to remember something? It's a heuristic. Good. Are heuristics always correct? Do they always lead to like the correct answer? No. So why do people use heuristics then? It's easier, it's quicker, it allows you to make decisions easier under certain time deadlines. Good. One of the concepts we also talked about this chapter was the role that authority plays in influencing somebody's behavior. If an authority figure wants you to do something and you do it, even if it's like against your ideas of what's right or wrong, or even if it's not, even if you agree with them, but if you have an authority figure tells you to do something, you do it. What's that called? Nope. Close. You take your dog to this sometimes. Obedience school, yeah. So if you follow what an authority figure tells you to do, that's obedience. Okay? So what are some factors that make it more likely that you would do what an authority figure tells you to do? Okay, if you like them, if you perceive that they know what they're talking about, if you perceive that they're being trustworthy and honest, okay, what else?
Their intelligence.
Their intelligence? Okay. Let's put this scenario together. Let's say I say to everybody, don't cheat on the test, right? Don't cheat on this test. What's going to make it more likely? Like, what could I do? Or what could you have internally within you that would make it more likely that you would not cheat on the test? Okay, if there's a stern enough consequence. And there's a likelihood that you're going to get caught, right? So if I say like, hey, don't cheat on the test, and then I go sit in the office for 45 minutes and like watch TV, or it's in the spring the Twins game's on, I go sit in the office and watch the Twins game while everybody's taking a test. Are people going to be likely to obey in that instance? Not as likely as if I'm there, right? In part because there's a more likelihood that you're going to get caught. So, what else? Think back to the Milgram videos that we watched, right? What was the heart of the Milgram experiment? Remember? The Milgram experiment, they had two people in a room, and they gave the actor a slip that said that they were the learner, right? And then what happened? Yeah, they made it sound like that they were going to get shocked, right? So, in that instance, people were put in a situation where they believed they were like harming somebody else, right? Why did they continue in that instance, or why did they quit? Like, what were some of the things that they said? Remember? that it wasn't harmful. Good. And then what else? When they'd stop and they'd be like, so I'm the person hitting the button that says shop, right? I'd stop and I'd quiet the researcher. I'd say, I can't do this anymore. What would he say? Just do it. It's like, it's essential that this continues, right? So in that instance, there's no threat to me necessarily, right? He's not sitting there holding a gun to my head saying, do this. He's just saying it's essential. And then I respond, well, you said I can quit at any time. And then he would respond, yeah, I did say that, but it is essential that you continue. Some people kept going there, right? So just the force of the personality of the authority figure. Okay, one of the other ideas we talked about was something called catharsis or cathartic behavior. What is catharsis? Right, so if you have like something that's really frustrating you, if you listen to really angry music or punch the wall or pick up a chair and break something, that would be a cathartic act. Yep. So for most people, is that effective? Does that help them to blow off steam? No, it just builds on it, right? Related to catharsis, we also talked about aggression a little bit. What's the psychological definition for aggression? Yeah, behavior intended to do physical or psychological harm to others. It doesn't have to be physical to be aggressive behavior, right? So some of the examples I used in class is like when you're in the dorm, you go to college, and you can't stand the people that live right next to you, and you know that they have to work really early, and you don't. You take your speaker, you got this big speaker, you turn it to face their wall, and you play like the loudest type of music that they can't stand, right? So that would be an example of aggression. You might be able to get some chairs there if you want. Okay. We also talked about types of leadership. What is a type of leadership where the leader isn't really in charge? They just kind of let things go, and the people under them are the ones really making decisions. Laissez-faire. What's the one where the leader and the people involved kind of make decision making together? Democratic. And then the one where the person is forceful and just decides everything themselves? Called authoritarian. Good. Okay, if you have a task to do, and when you're around other people, you do it better, what is that called? You have a task to do, you do it better around other people. So if you're in a situation where you have people around, what type of situation is that called, first of all? It's a social situation, okay? So the first word of that definition is social, right? Just kind of use your common sense when you're testing here, even if you forget the terms, right? Okay? No? That has to do with leadership, or group roles in leadership. But let's talk about, you're doing something in a group now, and if you're going to do it better, if something gets better, it's facilitated, right? So it's social facilitation. Now if you're in a setting, and when you're in that social setting you do things worse, what's that called? Inhibition. Yeah, social inhibition. Okay, so Nolan just mentioned something that's related to group functioning and purposes of groups, right? We talked about two different types of groups in class. We talked more than that, but two of the types were called primary groups and secondary groups, right? So what is a primary group like? Right, so it's your family, your close friends. They tend to be longer lasting. They tend to have different functions than secondary groups do, right? So secondary group is like your coworkers, sports team maybe, some people that get together to accomplish something. Their primary functions are task groups, right? Whereas in primary groups, their main functions tend to be like social functions, like support, getting together just for the sake of getting together, not necessarily to get something done. Okay? So, can secondary groups become primary groups over time? Yeah. So, a common example is you have a class or a sports team, whatever, you come together with the purpose of learning or accomplishing a goal for the team, or if you're in a play. But then over time, that time that you spend together leads to you being closer, right? Okay, in addition to primary and secondary groups, we talked about also formal and informal groups. So those are also kind of related. Formal groups are more focused on getting stuff done, whereas informal groups are more focused on just the social settings. So, not always, but primary groups, do those tend to be formal groups or informal groups? Primary groups? Like if you call your friends up and you say, hey, let's hang out. Informal, yeah, sorry. Got hit in the head a lot, it's loud. I got a teacher here too. Okay. Okay. Another concept we talked about was conformity in class. What's the psychological definition of conformity? Or just do a definition of conformity that you have. If you conform, what do you do?
Change your behavior.
Okay. You behave like other people. And why do you conform then? What's a main reason that people conform? Yeah, to fit in better with the group. Good. So, sometimes that conformity comes from direct peer pressure. So you might be on in a play or in a band, and the older upperclassmen will say, hey, you all have to wear blue shirts today, or whatever. So say, okay, I'll wear the blue shirts because they said directly you had to, right? Sometimes they might not say that you have to. Sometimes they might just imply that you have to. They might just like put pressure on you. You see all the upperclassmen wearing certain things. They don't directly tell you to dress like that, but you just do it anyways, right? Another one of the concepts we talked about in class was called de-individuation. De-individuation. What does de-individuation mean?
It's like in a group, you lose your individuality.
Okay, when you're in a group, you lose your individuality, but explain a little bit more. How does that affect you?
You're more likely
thinking
to
or
do
your behavior?
something you normally wouldn't.
Okay, you're more likely to do something that normally you wouldn't, right? So, who watched the Bison game yesterday? At the end of the game, all kinds of people rushed the floor, right? Jumped on the field and were jumping around. Yeah, what's going on? There's like thousands of people on the floor there. Obviously, it's a national championship game. That's playing a role in influencing how people act. But at the same time, they're 1,000 miles away from home. If they get on the floor and just rush the floor, like even though there's a security guard saying, hey, don't do this, they're not going to be as easily identified in that setting, right? Whereas if you're at, let's say, state hockey, in West Fargo wins state hockey, and then you've got Mr. Jones or some other people around there saying, don't jump on the ice afterwards, or don't run in the locker room, or whatever, you're going to be less likely to do it there because you're more likely to be identified, okay? So the key factor in that de-individuation is group size, and then likelihood that you're going to be identified. Okay, let's say that you're in a group and you don't work as hard on stuff as you could because more people are responsible for that. What is that called?
Laziness.
Laziness, yep. But besides laziness, What else? I played a clip from South Park for that one. Remember? Okay, you're in a group. What's the first word? Social. Okay. What's the second word then? You take it easy. Yeah, you loaf, right? Social loafing. Good. Okay, let's see. Derek, you're in soccer, right? Nolan, you're in soccer too, right? Okay. So, their type of group now, like them and all the other people that are in soccer, Paul and whoever else, right? Them versus other people. What are the people within their group called? Their in-group. Good. People not on the soccer team that are maybe on the football team or whatever else, what would they be called? Out-group. Okay. Or your soccer team versus Fargo South soccer team, or your soccer team versus Bismarck soccer team. Okay. Okay. So see how we talked about a bunch of different types of groups? There's all these different ways to break it down. Okay. What's the key variable in determining whether marriage will be successful? No, not necessarily.
Communication.
What'd you say? You're getting there. Okay. So let's say, I'll give you a couple of examples. Let's say Derek and Alexis go to college, start dating. They're looking at getting married, and Alexis is like, I want 20 kids. And Derek's like, I want 6 kids. Okay? What was that?
That was our dance competition.
Oh, it was?
Keep it down over there, Miss Jane. Jackie.
So, Alexis is like, I want 20 kids. Derek's like, I want 6 kids. Okay? And then Alexis is like, I want to stay at home, and Derek's like, you need to work. And then Alexis is like, I don't know, I think we should go on vacation once a year for a week. And Derek's like, no, we shouldn't go on vacation at all. How can we do that? We got 20 kids. Okay? So are they going to have some difficulties? Yeah, so, yeah, values and expectations. Exactly. So that's kind of the key variable. If the husband and the wife agree on similar values and expectations, it makes it more likely that their marriage is going to work out. Okay? Okay. In the United States now, after the 50s, the trend for the divorce rate was what? What happened? Did it go up, go down, stay the same? It went up. Then in like the late 80s, what happened to it? Leveled off, and then what has it done since then?
It's the same.
Stayed leveled off, okay? At about what percent? At about 50%. Good. Okay, we also talked about types of love. There were 2 different types of love that were talked about within a romantic relationship. Anybody remember what those names are called? What the terms are for that? Okay, I'll give you 2 types of love. I'll give you a scenario, 2 different scenarios to represent them. Like a couple that's sitting at the mall, or compassionate. Good. So let me give you a scenario. It's actually passionate and companionate. Sorry.
Yeah.
Compassionate. Okay. So passionate and companionate. Now, if you see a couple at the mall and they're like rubbing each other's noses and like kissing and holding hands, and then they like sneak off in the corner of the store and they're making out for a little bit, whatever, what type of love would that fit under? Passionate. Okay. Now you see like an old couple like comes in right now, and the guy holds the door for his wife and then like holds her hand as she's walking up. What type of love is that? Companion. Okay. Which one of those is more stable? Companion. Good. Which one of those tends to be associated with younger people? Passionate. also talked about something in a class called groupthink. Groupthink. Groupthink is a tendency to make poor decisions when there's a couple of different variables present. So what are some of the different variables that lead to groupthink? Okay, sometimes peer pressure.
You don't think you have a say?
Okay, you believe that maybe your opinion isn't valued or isn't important. Good. The other things are like time pressure to try to get something done, and then a forceful leader. What's the general term for standards of behavior for members of any group, no matter how large or small it is? Standards of behavior for any group, no matter how large or small it is. The norm, good. So in a large group like society, we have norms of behavior, like don't budge in line, don't talk at movies, right, stuff like that. In small groups, we also have norms as well. Let's say that, okay, we got these people coming in, these two little kids, and let's say the kids fall over, and then no one gets up and helps them, and then the lady says thank you, and then they walk away, right? What can we call his behavior? Kid falls over, starts crying, Nolan slides over, helps the kid up, holds the door for him, whatever, they leave. He has no clue who they are, just met him. What could we call his behavior? Starts with an A. Starts with A. It's altruistic behavior. Okay. So there's a key variable in order for it to be altruistic, right? It's helping behavior, but in order for it to be identified as altruism, what does it have to have?
Without a reward?
No apparent reward, exactly. So if the lady walks in and says, hey, hold my kid's hand for a little bit, like help him up here, and then I'll buy you a drink, okay? That's not altruism, okay? Or if his buddy, the example I think I used in class was if one of your buddies moves, and your buddy calls you up and says, hey, I gotta get ready to go to college, help me move out of my room. A week later, I'll come and help you move. That's not altruism either, because there's an apparent reward, right? So be able to apply that to a scenario. Okay. When you have people that tend to agree with one position, and you bring them together to discuss something, their opinions on that position get more solidified and more extreme, right? So you look at the Republican convention when they're trying to vote for nominees for Republican president position, right? The position of the group tends to be more to the right, more conservative. Take the Democrats, they go further to the left, right? So what's that called? The tendency to push views to the extremes. Group polarization. Good. When we had the clip in class where the girl was yelling, help, you're not my dad, you're not my dad, and then those two guys like dropped the bag and took off like they were going to beat down the other guy, right? What was that testing out? Bystander effect. So what is the bystander effect? What is the bystander effect?
You feel less responsible because there are other people that can take responsibility also.
Okay, you feel less responsible because there's other people in a setting that can take responsibility, right? So some dude comes in here and starts causing problems. There's like 40 people in here. Your tendency would be to just sit back and maybe not do anything, okay? Another thing we talk talked about in class is brainwashing, right? When you brainwash somebody, what are you trying to change? Okay, their attitudes about something good. So what's the key process in that? Like, what do you have to do first? Before you can put in what you want, what do you have to do with their old methods of thinking? Yeah, break it down, right? Get rid of it. So how do you do that? What do people usually do with brainwashing? Do they try to like logically debate them? So if I'm trying to brainwash someone, do I say, hey, here's what you think now, this is wrong, I think you should think this instead. So what would I do? Do what? I'd do that if I was trying to brainwash you. Like I kidnap you and take you to a cult and I'm trying to brainwash you. And I like argue for why, like it's the Hale Bob Comet cult again. Like, hey, when we all kill ourselves, we're gonna get beamed up to this comet where alien gods are going to help us. Like, and let's all wear Nikes and white shirts, and we'll all poison ourselves at the same time and put cloaks over ourselves. Like, do people do that when they want to brainwash people? Probably not. Okay. So what are they gonna use to try to brainwash people? Yeah, like force or some extreme type of rewards, right? So if you're like providing punishment or rewards, what perspective in psychology would explain that most of the time? Which type?
Conditioning.
Okay, which is part of what branch in psychology? Behavioral psychology. Good. Okay, let's say that you go hang out with somebody that has totally different beliefs than you, and like you've heard some bad stuff happen to you related to those beliefs, so then you further solidify your position against those beliefs, right? What's that called? No. You're close though, you're in the right area. Like, so I go listen to some people debate about how teaching social studies is important so that I can figure out what they're saying and try to debate against them. And then my opinion is like stronger on that side. That's the inoculation effect. Right? Okay, now let's say that I'm trying to change your attitude and you don't believe me right away, but then over time you start to adopt my beliefs, right? What's that called? So it takes a while for the attitude change to take place. Like the ideas are in your mind, they're dormant, but then they kind of wake up later. The sleeper effect is what that's called. One of the concepts, this I wasn't actually there for, I was at the meeting, so I'll probably take a little bit of time to explain this one. Cognitive dissonance, right? So, cognitive dissonance is where like you have a deeply held belief and then something like a feeling or another belief or some type of behavior that you exhibit goes against that deeply held belief and you feel really uncomfortable about it, right? So then how can you deal with that cognitive dissonance? Like what can you do? So I have a belief and I start to act or feel in a manner that's contradictory to that belief, right? What could I do to minimize those feelings that I'm experiencing? Okay, change my beliefs, right? What else?
Something about the reward has to be enough for you to justify lying or something, that video.
Okay.
Does that have anything to do with it?
Well, no, not necessarily. Because if the reward's enough, then I can just say, well, I just did it for the money, right? Remember that? So you change your belief to think, oh, I really thought that this was interesting. Because in the video, I had a few of these, I can't remember which one I showed, but the study that they did for this, they had somebody take like knobs and turn them a quarter turn. And then the guy would watch and write it down, and he'd say, okay, do it again. And and they do it for like a half hour. That's it. Turn all the knobs or turn with one hand. The guy'd say, okay, use your left hand. Use your right hand. In a half hour, that would be horrible, right? So no rational person would find that interesting, that in and of itself. So then when they offered the people the $20 to say, oh yeah, it's interesting, you believe I just did it for the money. When they offered them $1, you were like, well, maybe it really wasn't that bad, because the dollar isn't really that good of a reward. Okay? So you can change your belief, you can change some of your other behaviors, you can fight against it, or you can rationalize it. Basically, you can use a number of what psychoanalytical theorists would call defense mechanisms to try to explain your behavior. Okay. Let's say Steiner's not in the announcements as much as Clark was, but you remember how Clark would get on the announcements all the time and he'd be like, hey, you gotta do this in homeroom? I've literally seen students, when I was in the Commons and Clark would get up and he's like, hey, make sure you do a good job cleaning the Commons, and they'd look up at the speaker and they'd throw something on the floor and walk away, right? Okay? Could you see somebody doing that or not? Right? So what's that an example of? That's something that somebody just mentioned a second ago. Okay. That's the boomerang effect. Yeah. So that's like doing the opposite of what somebody wants you to do. Or believing the opposite of what somebody wants you to do. Okay, let's say that you think that Haley is really friendly and you think Nicole is a jerk, right? So whenever you see Haley, you're like, hey Haley, how are you? I hope you had a good weekend, whatever. And then when you see Nicole, you're like, hi. And then you go sit down, right? So then over time, Haley is going to smile at you more and interact with you more, and then Nicole is going to just be like, hi, also, right? So your belief that Haley is friendly in your behavior leads to her being more friendly. Your belief that Nicole is a jerk and you treating her kind of like that leads to her acting in a manner that could be perceived as being a jerk. What is that called? Self-fulfilling prophecy. Good. Okay. Some of these are really hard to discuss. Okay, we talked about something in class called the fundamental attribution error. Fundamental attribution error. That's the general term for a variety of different things in which you believe that your behaviors and attitudes have different causes than other people, right? So, some of the things that we talked about related to that were the actor-observer bias, and another concept called self-serving bias. If you do well on a test, and you're like, I'm smart, I worked hard, I deserved it. And if somebody else does well on a test, you think that like they're lucky, they just got lucky, they didn't really deserve it, right? Does that fit more in the self-serving bias or the actor-observer bias? Self-serving, right? These are subtle. Basically, the key difference is whether you attribute your success to like an internal variable or an external variable, right? So if you attribute your success to an internal variable, like you're good, you're smart, you're rich, whatever, then that's self-serving bias. If like you attribute your behavior to the other thing, like, oh, the situation was bad, it's not really my fault, whatever, that's the actor-observer bias, okay? So, yeah, so like the common example you'll hear with this is like driving or moral failings, right? So if like you leave here and you're driving and you cut somebody off, and you're like, oh, the sun was in my eyes, like today. Like, The sun was in my eyes, that's why I didn't see that. Really? But if that's the situation, but then 20 seconds later, Riley cuts you off and you're like, she's a horrible driver and cheer her, right? That's the accurate driver. Okay? Okay. If you adopt values similar to somebody that you like, you don't really relate the attitudes or try to understand them or try to evaluate them. You just adopt values based on somebody that you know and like. What is that called? Sometimes you might conform to people that you don't like, right? You just go along to avoid like people making fun of you or whatever. So look at Mean Girls, right? The Plastics and Mean Girls. Like secretly they really hated Regina George, right? But they do it anyways. They act like her anyways. They conform because they want to stay in that group, right? But if you adopt attitudes that are similar to somebody else, since you know them, what's that called? That's identification, okay? If you hate going to prom, but you just do it anyways because everybody else does, right? Do it anyways because everybody else does. That could be conformity, right? But that could also be called counter-attitudinal behavior because you're behaving in a manner that's against what your attitude is. Okay, another thing that we talked about in class was the 4 parts of communication. 4 parts of communication. This, I believe, was on Friday. Who can tell me the 4 parts of communication? Give me one first. The message. So the message is what's being argued, right? What's being stated. So who can tell me another part of communication? The channel. So Riley, what's the channel? Okay, so in person for you, and then the people that are watching this later on YouTube, it'd be over there. Good. Okay. We got 2 more parts. What else are we missing? Source. Okay, what's the source? In this example, it's me, right? So it's the person or organization that the information's coming from. And then lastly, the audience. So that would be you, some random people that maybe walk by, or people on the internet that watch this, right? Okay. Another thing that we also talked about was prejudice and discrimination, right? What's the key difference between prejudice and discrimination?
Discrimination's the act.
Discrimination's a behavior. Prejudice is the thought process, yeah. Discrimination is a behavior and an act, good. Prejudice is the mental state. The last thing we talked about with communication was different ways you can argue to try to persuade somebody's attitude. I'll give you a couple examples. Let's say that I'm arguing for you to give money to Compassion International or one of those other organizations that you can sponsor a child for $20 a month and then they'll provide them with education goals, right? You guys seen those commercials on TV? Okay. And if I tell you in Africa right now there's 2 million children that have this difficulty, and by giving them $10 a month you can help them to get 3 meals a day and all this stuff, right? What route am I taking to try to convince you? The central route, right? If I stand in front of you and I'm pulled in and I'm like, this is John. And John looks just beat down and he's crying and I'm like, help John now, help get him out of this suffering, right? What route am I taking there? Peripheral. So, if you were to ask somebody to go to prom with you and be like, I'm a guy, you're a girl, neither one of us has a date, a lot of people go to prom, there's only 3 weeks away and we should be able to plan. Why don't you go to prom with me? What route are you taking? Central. You get the person flowers and like, lead with them and say, I want to go to prom, and if I don't have a date, I'm going to feel horrible and whatever. You're taking the peripheral route, right? Okay. Are prejudices or stereotypes always negative? No. So you could be prejudiced to like athletes or girls or members of your own ethnicity or religion, right? You could treat them more favorably. You could discriminate against them in a favorable way, right? When it comes to verbal or nonverbal communication, are both important? Let's start with that first of all. Both important? Yeah. Okay. In most instances, if people actually can see the person communicating, which of those plays a bigger role? Verbal or nonverbal? And like your likelihood that you'll go with their attitude or be persuaded by them. Yeah, the nonverbal does. I think that's it, really. I mean, the other stuff I've covered, it's just applying concepts. Okay. So, any questions? If you have any questions that you don't understand, you stick around, I can explain. The triarchic theory of love? Yeah. That's not on the test at all. So, I can explain it if you wanted to. Yeah. Nah, that's not worth it.
Do you want us to turn your camera off? So, like,
Yeah, go ahead.
you have 3 minutes with that.